The words of Rabbi Sidney Axelrod. A flood of memories overwhelm me as we go about the temple grounds. So many thoughts and so many feelings. There are so many people who have given of themselves in so many ways to Congregation Beth Am, to our faith and people and community. We, as part of Beth Am, know very vividly who have worked so hard to make Beth Am what it is. There was a movement to name this area after so-and-so and another area after someone else. But somehow the temptation was overcome with the feeling that Beth Am is truly a house of the people, and everyone is a part of Beth Am. Someone once said to me, "You don't see any names. It's anonymous." To me, it isn't anonymous. To me, I see so many people who are willing to give far beyond their egos, thinking in terms of Jewish life, of their children, of future generations, and hoping that people would continue to enjoy it. In a way, I see so many faces before me, people who have risen above self and who have invested self in our people and in our faith. Without them, I would not have been able to do what I have done to serve this congregation. Those words were spoken by Rabbi Axelrod in 1993 when he created a video tour of Congregation Beth Am. The video project was coordinated by Ron Schilling, who's here tonight, and by F. Cannon, Zichrona Livracha. If you want to find it, you can find it on the Beth Am webpage. Tonight, on this most special weekend, it's a delight to celebrate the legacy of Rabbi Sidney Axelrod with our annual Axelrod Lecture. We specifically welcome Lisa Axelrod and Audrey Smith. Will you guys raise your hand? Where are you out there? So delightful to have you in the congregation. And we also know that there's so many here at Beth Am that continue to miss Rabbi Axelrod's presence. If you had a bar mitzvah or were married or had a baby naming by Rabbi Axelrod, will you raise your hand at this point? So, if he gave you words of comfort ever, or consoled you, or celebrated another simcha with you, keep your hands up. If you were touched by his generosity or commitment to others, commitment to social justice, commitment to community. If you never met him, but you feel his spirit every time you walk in Beth Am. So our annual Axelrod lecture tonight is Alon Shalev, who'll be giving our sermon. Alon is the executive director of American Jewish World Service, AJWS in San Francisco, and the entire Western region. Inspired by the Jewish commitment to justice, American Jewish World Service, AJWS, works to realize human rights and end poverty in the developing world. AJWS was founded in 1985 by American Jews who wanted to join together as global citizens to help some of the poorest and most oppressed people around the globe. Today, AJWS is the only Jewish organization dedicated solely to ending poverty and promoting human rights in the developing world. Alon is a lifelong advocate for human rights. As a teenager and student in London, Alon campaigned for Amnesty International and the anti-apartheid movement and advocated for the rights of Jews to immigrate to the Soviet Union. He campaigned in 1982 for the fledgling Ecology Party in England, the forerunner of the Green Party. Connected to the Reform movement, Alon lived for 2 decades on Kibbutz Olotan, one of the Reform Judaism's international communities in the Arava, or kibbutzim in the Arava in the south of Israel, where he continued to promote the rights of Jews from the Soviet Union who had settled in Israel. In his free time, Alon has authored several novels with social justice themes, including The Accidental Activist and The Unwanted Heroes. So maybe one of our many book groups can seize one of those in the coming months. I also want to point out that Alon is here with 2 other AJWS staff members who are specifically connected to Congregation Beth Am, Larissa and Shoshana. Where are you guys? Can you stand up? So it's really fun to have Larissa, who had her bat mitzvah at Congregation Beth Am like 7 or 8 years ago, and then Shoshana, whose grandparents are the Schillings, and whose mom and aunt and uncle and cousins are all deeply connected to Congregation Beth Am. And then just finally, Alon is joined tonight by Noah Bullock. Noah, will you stand up and wave so we see you? Noah is the executive director of Cristosal, and Cristosal is an El Salvador-based NGO that works to advance human rights in Central America through rights-based research, learning, and programming. Cristosal is a grantee of AJWS, and this is kind of neat in my mind, a longtime partner of All Saints Episcopal Church in Palo Alto, one of Beth Am's closest interfaith partners, including part of our Building Bridge programs. We're exploring working with AJWS and Cristosal in the future. And I just want to remind everyone, immediately after the service, there'll be an oneg where both Noah and Alon will be happy to take questions about tonight's sermon, about the work of AJWS and Cristosal. So it's a delight to welcome Alon Shalev to Beth Am this evening for the 5780 Rabbi Sidney Axelrod Lecture.
To be told to be a rabbi. Can I just say before I start that this is such a beautiful building. It's the first time I prayed here. And Larissa said it's meant to be a tent and a gathering people together, and it's amazing. Thank you, Rabbi Jonathan, for organizing this and for inviting us. And thank you to the Axelrod family. I'm honored to be giving this speech, particularly having heard about his commitment to social justice and to be able to be a part of remembering him and the work that he did. And as Rabbi Jonathan mentioned, I'm proud to be here together with Noah Bullock, the executive director of one of our grantee partners, Cristosal. I'll highlight some of their work in a moment. And then, as we mentioned, in the oneg afterwards, he'll correct everything I got wrong. For 35 years, American Jewish World Service, AJWS, inspired by Judaism's commitment to justice, has worked to end poverty and promote human rights in the developing world. Together, we have tackled some of the greatest challenges of our time: genocide, AIDS, violence against women, discrimination against LGBTI, and increasingly natural and man-made disasters. We work in 19 countries across 4 continents and help almost 500 grassroots organizations. Our work is made possible by contributions from our many donors who share our vision of a world where human rights are universally recognized, where poverty, discrimination, and violence no longer exist, and where individuals can live their lives in dignity. We work in 4 main areas: advancing the health and right of women, girls, and LGBTI people. We apply a feminist approach to our grant making. The underlying objective is to increase the power and potential of women and girls in the developing world. AJWS Grants addresses the ways in which existing systems of power and privilege affect the rights of women and girls who are often at the lowest rung of societal hierarchies. Research, including a landmark study by the World Bank, clearly show that raising the status of women raises the standard of living and human rights for all. AJWS has been blessed with a multi-million-dollar multi-year grant to try and end early and forced marriage in India. In 2014, even though it was against the law to marry under the age of 18, 48% of girls were married by the time they reached that age. And that number is coming down. It's now 29%. But while this reduction is welcome, it is still too much. 15 million child brides around the world is 15 million too many. Young women and girls lose their families' protections. They lose the rights to their bodies and access to education, their only realistic vehicle out of poverty. And in 78 countries, that's 1/3 of the nation states, people can be arrested for loving someone of the same gender. In 10 countries, homosexuality is punishable by death. Uganda in 2014 passed a law in which it was illegal to even know somebody who is gay. AJWS sponsored Chapter 4, and their lawyers over 5 days scrutinized live through the TV, took the government to court, and won on saying that it was unconstitutional. Our second area is our civil and political rights. We were in Burma in 2014, helping to create an environment in which people would have the bravery to go and vote after 50 years of military junta. And we were there again in 2018, when 700,000 Rohingya Muslims fled across the river Naf to Bangladesh to escape a pogrom. In the Dominican Republic, Dominicans of Haitian descent, often third generation Dominicans, are faced with deportation to a country they don't know. For us as Jews, statelessness and pogroms are things we painfully understand. Our third area are land, water, and climate justice. And in many regions of the world, governments and corporations exploit local communities' natural resources for financial gain without the consent or participation of local indigenous people. They are often the front line of climate justice struggle, and their voice has a long tradition of being ignored. This exploitation often involves constructing large and destructive dams or drilling for oil, gas, and minerals that lie beneath land farmed by communities for generations. The Ogiek tribe in northern Kenya is a tribe living in the forest that has seen 90% of their habitat cut down for logging. And when the government decided to evict them in order to take the last 10%, AJWS helped them navigate through the courts in Kenya. And when that failed, to go to the African Court for Indigenous Peoples' Rights, who set a binding precedent that first of all gave these people their land and the right to live on this land, and secondly instructing the Kenyan government to plant 1 million trees to replenish the forest. It was a victory for the Ogiek, it was a victory for indigenous people everywhere, and for the planet. And our fourth area, one which probably many of you might have first come into contact with AJWS, is our disaster and civil war recovery. Darfur, tsunami, the Haitian earthquakes, Nepal, the Ebola outbreak in Africa, the Mexican earthquakes. AJWS is effective at giving quick response in the countries we work because we already have a connection with leadership who can identify where the help is needed and can get those resources to people quickly. And we're also able to identify the groups that are marginalized and often will not receive help from the traditional agencies. But all these statistics are on our website, and it's not going to be part of the test we give you tonight. There are three things I really want you to understand that differentiate AJWS and its work. The first is we don't come in and say, you need a hospital, we're going to build you a hospital, or you need a school, we're going to build you a school. We believe that the people who suffer from poverty and discrimination are the best place to develop long-term sustainable solutions. Our former CEO and president, Ruth Messenger, who was before Robert Bank, was approached by a philanthropist in New York whose mother had been a teacher all her life. And he said, if you ever get an opportunity to build a school somewhere in Africa, I'd be honored to pay for it in her name. And Ruth said, thank you, it's not something we do, but if I ever hear of this opportunity, I'll think of it and I'll let you know. And not long after she was in Uganda, she came out of a grantee's building and saw a man teaching children under a tree. She approached the teacher and said, what would it look like if I told you I could find the money to build you a school and put all the equipment in that you need? And he said, madam, if you have that kind of money, I'd like to be able to feed these children breakfast so they don't come to my lessons hungry and can focus on what they're doing instead of worrying and fearing where their next meal will come from. We believe that people who suffer poverty and discrimination are the people who best know what their solutions are. And the second thing I want to share with you is about our in-country consultants. In every country that we work, we have at least one person who was born and educated in that country, who is a recognized community activist, who can identify cutting-edge organizations poised to make a difference. And the third thing I want to share with you is that we strongly encourage our grantees to get involved in advocacy and social movements, because this allows them to amplify the impact of their work. 2 summers ago, the Supreme Court in India ruled that triple talaq, when a Muslim man can say to his wife 3 times, "I divorce you," and she has to leave without any possessions, without her children, with nothing, is unconstitutional. And Nick Kristof, the New York Times reporter, who I love and read all his work, said that overnight, over 90 million women, Muslim women, got their rights back. I'm going to respectfully disagree with Nick on this, because it wasn't overnight. It was 9.5 years of grueling process that began with one female Muslim lawyer in Mumbai who had the vision and the tenacity to build a social movement that took it to the Supreme Court and made such a groundbreaking decision. Let me share an example of an exemplary grantee partner, Christosal. And again, the executive director, Noah Bullock, is with us today and will be available to answer questions in the ONEG. The phenomenon of internal forced displacement in El Salvador continues to escalate as a direct violent tactic by the state and non-state actors. The communities affected by forced displacement are overwhelmingly poor and with few opportunities for social or economic development. With no legal framework to address forced displacement, public institutions are overwhelmed by the need and demand to support an ever-growing number of victims. State agencies outsource cases, particularly those that require humanitarian assistance, to civil society organizations like Christosal, who have the capacity and expertise to provide direct support to victims. Christosal will celebrate this year 2 decades of advancing human rights in Central America. Its approach to community development and poverty reduction recognizes at the core the inherent dignity, equality, and inalienable rights of every human being. This principle repositions the poor from victims and beneficiaries of charity to citizen partners, architects, and owners of their own development and struggle. Christosal supports victims of violence by providing protection when they most need it, repair the effects of human rights violations through strategic court cases, and work with communities to build environments where peace is possible. Why are we as Jews compelled to do this work? It is apt this weekend to quote Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And as Jews, we know it only takes one crazy dictator to bring about a Holocaust. I do this work proudly as a Jew with a vision for Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. I stand here with a keen understanding of the past, a powerful stake in the present, and a hopeful eye on the future. I do this work because as a European Jew whose parents were saved from the Holocaust by 22 miles of narrow ocean, the English Channel, I understand that all humans deserve inalienable rights, no matter who they are, where they live, or what government or set of laws they live under, and that we all have a responsibility to speak out. Never again means never again for all humanity. People claim they never knew about the Holocaust when it was happening. Today, in the age of technology and communications, there is no excuse for not knowing, no excuse for not acting. The ethnic cleansing of Rohingya Muslims in Burma compels us as Jews to stand up in protest. Rabbi David Wolpe of Sinai Temple in Los Angeles has written eloquently about something he calls the bias of the near. He says, "Things close to us seem of more importance than things far away." Wolpe goes on to say, "A moral life cannot only be lived with a focus on those next door. Someone starving across the world is as real as someone living beneath the bridge near our own homes." Much of AJWS's work is about bridging the near and the far. Our Jewish texts, values, and history compel us to work for universal justice and to honor the inherent dignity of all people, particularly those who are on the margins or are often rendered invisible, who are today's stranger. The vocabulary of social justice is not a modern invention. The ancient Jewish value of B'Tselem Elohim, created in the image of God, stands alongside the more modern universal Declaration of Human Rights. That critical insight that all of us are equally made in the image of the divine means we are all therefore all equal, all deserving of human dignity, and all entitled to the full protection of our most basic rights. So what's Jewish about this work? When my youngest son was bar mitzvahed, he declared from the pulpit, Tzedek, tzedek tirdof. Justice, justice, you must pursue. God doesn't request it of us. God requires it of us. At AJWS, we strive to integrate two Jewish principles when working with our grantees. The first is partnership, chevruta. Traditionally, Jewish study happens in partnerships, two people, recognizing that we each have things to learn and things to teach. Chevruta study is decentralized, democratic, and egalitarian. It often precedes with neither an authority figure to provide the right answer, nor an assumption that there is a definitive right answer to begin with. And the second principle, closely related to the first, is Shema, listening. The essence of the Shema, the imperative to listen, to pay attention to injustice, and to mend the brokenness of this world. This is how AJWS funds grantees, by listening and learning from their vision with humility and offering our expertise to help them realize their aspirations. Some of you may be wondering, is it good for the Jews? In 2014, I was in Calcutta with a number of our donors. There are 36 Jews left in Calcutta. 35 are not walking around anymore. And we know this because we met the 36th who showed us around Jewish Calcutta and shared the history of the people who lived there. And the following day, we went to a Muslim group, a Muslim grantee, that extricates young women from abusive marriages, helps them navigate the legal system, provides them with places to live, and then teaches them computer skills so that they can work and be independent. As often happens, these young women, there were about 60 of them, showed us some of the work that they're doing, in this case street theater, in which they were trying to show young women and girls that it's not okay and it's not normal to be abused, and it's not okay for gender-based violence. And when they finished, I stood up to tell them who AJWS was. And it occurred to me, 36 Jews in Calcutta, 35 not walking around in a city of 20 million. These girls have never met a Jew before. And I started talking about the things I just mentioned, that B'Tselem Elohim, that we're all made in the image of God, that our faith requires and insists that we work for justice. And when I finished, the girls jumped up and ran to the women in our group. And for one moment, these poor Muslim girls living in Calcutta and these wealthy American Jews had something in common, which was our faith. And perhaps that's a thread that can help us move to a more just world. I'll close by offering some words from Rabbi Avraham Joshua Heschel, who was mentioned earlier, one of the greatest thinkers and most powerful global citizens in Jewish history. Two observances. Judaism takes the mind out of the narrowness of self-interest. In other words, Jewish tradition gives us the vocabulary, values, stories, and moral grounding to live our lives compassionately and in deep connection with others, to use the particularity of Judaism to work for universal justice. And he said, in a free society where terrible wrongs exist, some are guilty, but all are responsible. This work that I speak of is our work. We often believe that our role in alleviating poverty and promoting human rights is of little significance, but this is not true. We must not retreat into the convenience of being overwhelmed. We must do our part to make a difference as Jewish global citizens, and must do it together in order to make a difference. The fact that most of those suffering around the world are not Jewish does not excuse us from rallying to their side, and from doing so with the indignation and passion that burns from our own experiences of injustice and mistreatment. Stand up as Americans, stand up as Jews, stand up because our faith and our humanity and our history compels us to do so. The Jewish writer and activist Grace Paley once wrote, "The only recognizable feature of hope is action." So I encourage you to take action. With your financial resources and your time, please take home and read the materials we have outside, and when you finish with them, pass them on to a friend. And visit our website at ajws.org and become a player for human rights. Let's build a better, safer future for our children and grandchildren, our sisters and brothers, and future generations everywhere. Thank you for listening. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.